They didn't fight. They didn't brag. And most of the time, they didn't even say much. In a league where toughness, trash talk, and loud personalities often steal the spotlight, Daniel and Henrik Sedin stood out by doing the exact opposite, staying quiet. Too quiet, some said. People thought they were too polite for the NHL, too soft, too silent to lead a team or carry a franchise. But over the years, those same quiet twins went on to rewrite what greatness looks like in hockey. They didn't need to yell. They let their game do the talking and change the sport forever. If you're enjoying stories like this one, the kind that go beyond the highlights and show how legends are really made, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We dive deep into the players who didn't fit the mold, but still changed the game forever. Now, to understand how two quiet twins from Sweden became NHL legends, we have to go back to 1980 in a small town called Örnsköldsvik. It's a place most people can't even pronounce, but in Sweden, it's known for one thing: hockey. This town didn't care about fame or flash. It cared about hard work, family, and the game. And in the middle of it were two red-headed boys, Daniel and Henrik, who seemed to move in perfect sync from the very beginning. They weren't trying to be stars. They weren't chasing attention. They just loved playing together, on the pond, in the backyard, at school. Coaches noticed something strange about them. It wasn't just that they passed the puck well, it was that they always seemed to know where the other one was, even without looking. People started calling it twin telepathy, but really, it was hours and hours of quiet practice. Day after day, just the two of them, building a style of hockey no one else could copy. Back then, the NHL didn't really know what to do with players like that. Teams wanted big, tough forwards, guys who could hit, yell, and fight. But the Sedins weren't loud. They weren't aggressive. They just played smart, smooth, unselfish, and over time that scared people because it worked. What started in a small Swedish town began to reshape the entire league's idea of what leadership, teamwork, and dominance could look like. The Sedins weren't just changing the Vancouver Canucks. Without trying to, they were changing hockey itself. Daniel and Henrik were born just 6 minutes apart on September 26, 1980, in Örnsköldsvik, a cold little town on Sweden's northeastern coast where hockey wasn't just a sport, it was a way of life. Their dad worked in the school system and their mom was a nurse. They weren't rich and they weren't chasing fame. They were just a regular family in a hockey town. From the very beginning, the boys did everything together. Same classes, same friends, same routines, but once they stepped outside, it was all about hockey. They spent hours out on the frozen ponds near their house, not talking much, just passing, skating, shooting, then doing it again the next day. While other kids argued or tried to be the star, the Sedins just played, quietly, in sync, always looking for each other. What made them special wasn't just that they were twins, it was the way they saw the game, not as two players on the ice, but as one. Coaches noticed early on, Daniel was the goal scorer, Henrik the playmaker. But it didn't feel like roles, it felt natural, like breathing. One would pass, the other would shoot, one would move, the other would know where to be. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was magic. Even as teenagers, they were never the biggest or the fastest, but they saw the game differently. And even then, before the spotlight, before the NHL, you could tell these two weren't like everyone else. In 1999, the Vancouver Canucks were a mess. The team had just finished another disappointing season, and the future didn't look bright. They had a top 3 pick in the upcoming NHL draft, a rare chance to change everything. But what they did next shocked the hockey world. You see, that year's draft was loaded with talent, but all the attention from Vancouver's front office was focused on two quiet, red-headed twins from Sweden, Daniel and Henrik Sedin. Most teams liked one or the other. Some saw Daniel as the better scorer. Others preferred Henrik's playmaking, but nobody was seriously thinking about taking both. Nobody, except Brian Burke. Burke had just taken over as the Canucks' general manager, and from the moment he watched the Sedins play together in Sweden, he became obsessed. He didn't just want one of them, he wanted both, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. But there was a problem. The Canucks only had the 3rd overall pick. There was no way they could get both twins, unless something drastic happened. So Burke started working the phones hard. He made one trade, then another, then another. He convinced the Chicago Blackhawks to swap picks. He called Tampa Bay and made a deal there. Then he worked out an agreement with the Atlanta Thrashers, who held the 1st pick, promising them the player they wanted if they didn't mess up his plan. In just a few hours, Burke turned chaos into a masterpiece. When the draft finally began on June 26, 1999, everyone in the building was confused. How did Vancouver suddenly have the 2nd and 3rd picks? Then the truth came out. With the 2nd pick, the Canucks selected Daniel Sedin. With the 3rd pick, they took Henrik Sedin. It was one of the most unbelievable draft day moves in NHL history. The reaction? Mixed, to say the least. Some praised Burke's boldness, calling it genius. Others thought he'd lost his mind. Why spend so much just to get two players who had never played a game in North America? Why bet the future of your franchise on two quiet kids from Sweden? The media had questions. Fans were skeptical. And even some NHL insiders thought the Canucks had made a huge mistake. Was this the biggest risk in Canucks history? That was the headline in more than one newspaper the next morning. But for Burke, it wasn't a risk. It was a belief. He believed the Sedins were special. He believed that their chemistry couldn't be replaced. And most of all, he believed they needed each other to be great. No one knew it yet, but this gamble would go down as one of the smartest moves in NHL draft history. The Canucks didn't just get two top prospects. They got two future Hall of Famers who would define their franchise for the next 2 decades. And they did it all in one unforgettable day. When Daniel and Henrik Sedin first suited up for the Vancouver Canucks in the 2000 to 2001 NHL season, the expectations were sky high, but the results were far from immediate. They were just 20 years old, and though they had dominated in Sweden's top league with Moto Hockey, the NHL was a different world. The game was faster, the hits were harder, and the spotlight in a Canadian market like Vancouver was unforgiving. From the beginning, the Twins were labeled as too soft. Opponents didn't just challenge them physically, they targeted them, knowing the Sedins wouldn't fight back. Broadcasters questioned if they had what it took. Some fans even called for them to be split up, suggesting Henrik and Daniel might develop better on separate lines. That suggestion never gained traction inside the organization, but the doubt from outside was constant. Statistically, their first few seasons were quiet. Henrik posted just 29 points in his rookie year. Daniel scored 34. Their ice time was limited and they were bounced between different line mates. But if you watched closely, the chemistry that made them famous back home was still there. No-look passes, behind-the-net setups, perfect timing. The moments were brief, but the flashes of brilliance couldn't be ignored. Head coach Mark Crawford saw it. General manager Brian Burke, the same man who orchestrated the bold draft day moves to get both Sedins, remained patient. And the Sedins themselves, they didn't complain. They didn't demand more minutes. They just kept improving, in silence. Their turning point began around the 2005-06 season, after the NHL lockout. With new rules speeding up the game and reducing clutch and grab defense, the Sedins found space to operate, and they made it count. Henrik recorded 75 points that year. Daniel hit 71. Finally, Vancouver was seeing what they were capable of. More importantly, they were developing a reputation as players who made everyone around them better. Whether it was line mate Anson Carter scoring 33 goals in 2006, or Alex Burrows later enjoying a breakout season, one thing became clear. If you played with the Sedins, you produced. They were no longer two shy kids trying to find their place. Their chemistry had matured into something powerful, an engine that quietly drove Vancouver's offense. They didn't need to shout about it. The results spoke for themselves. And in the years to come, that connection would evolve from flashes of potential to full-on dominance, and rewrite what we thought elite hockey could look like. By the late 2000s, Daniel and Henrik Sedin had fully arrived, not just as skilled players, but as the faces of the Vancouver Canucks. Their development wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a steady climb. And by the time they hit their prime, the hockey world couldn't look away. From 2006 to 2012, the Sedins were among the NHL's most productive players. Their connection on the ice was unlike anything that the league had seen before. They didn't just play on the same line, they seemed to share the same brain. Their famous cycle game in the offensive zone became a nightmare for defenders. They'd move the puck around like it was attached to a string, tiring out opponents. Then strike with a tap-in goal that looked easy, but only because they made it look that way. In 2010, Henrik Sedin won the Art Ross Trophy as the NHL's leading scorer with 112 points, a first in Canucks history. He also captured the Hart Trophy as league MVP, cementing his place as one of the game's great playmakers. 1 year later, Daniel followed up with 104 points to win the Art Ross himself, and finished second in MVP voting. It was the first time in NHL history that brothers won back-to-back scoring titles, something no other duo has accomplished. But their dominance wasn't built on speed, grit, or power. It was built on intelligence, timing, and trust. While other stars dazzled with toe drags and breakaway goals, the Sedins played chess. They'd find each other with blind passes. They'd switch positions mid-play without saying a word. It was a style that left coaches stunned and fans in awe. Their power play unit became one of the league's most dangerous. Their ability to slow the game down and see passing lanes no one else saw turned them into artists. They weren't just effective, they were elegant. By 2011, the Canucks were the best team in hockey. They won the President's Trophy as the top regular season team and stormed through the playoffs. Henrik led all players in postseason assists. Daniel wasn't far behind in goals. They took Vancouver to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, though the closest the franchise had ever come to a championship. They didn't lift the cup, but their legacy was already sealed. In a league that often celebrated brute force and trash talk, the Sedins showed there was another way, a better way. Their dominance didn't need sound bites or fists, just quiet brilliance and a bond no one could break. They weren't just Vancouver's greatest players. They were proof that in hockey, greatness doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be real. In a league where stars often chase big contracts or greener pastures, Daniel and Henrik Sedin stayed in one place for their entire careers. From their draft day in 1999 to their final game in 2018, they wore only one jersey, the Vancouver Canucks. That kind of loyalty is rare in modern hockey, but for the Sedins, it was never about fame, money, or attention. It was about doing things the right way. They were offered chances to leave, including trade offers during rebuild years and free agency interest from other teams, but they always turned them down, not because they were afraid of change, but because they believed in Vancouver. They believed in finishing what they started. And when Henrik was named team captain in 2010, he didn't change who he was. He wasn't a loud, emotional leader. He didn't give fiery locker room speeches. He led by example, quietly, every day. He showed up early, trained hard, treated everyone with respect, from rookies to equipment staff. Daniel was the same. Together, they created a culture of humility and professionalism that shaped the entire locker room. Teammates loved them. Coaches trusted them. Opponents respected them. And through it all, they stayed true to themselves, soft-spoken, thoughtful, and incredibly driven. They were role models for more than just their stats. They were deeply involved in the community. The Sedins donated $1.5 million to a local children's hospital in Vancouver. Not for attention, not for headlines, but because it felt right. They visited patients, supported schools, and quietly became two of the most admired athletes the city has ever seen. As their careers went on, younger players began to arrive in Vancouver. Players like Bo Horvat, Chris Tanev, and Jacob Markstrom. And all of them looked up to the Sedins, not because they were told to, but because it was impossible not to. The way they handled pressure, the way they treated people, the way they carried themselves on and off the ice. It set a standard. When they announced their retirement in 2018, the entire hockey world took notice, not with sadness, but with gratitude. In their final home game, both Sedins were given a standing ovation. The next night, in their last NHL appearance, they combined for the game-winning goal in overtime. Daniel scoring, Henrik assisting, as if the script had written itself. They didn't just play the game, they elevated it. Quietly, consistently, and with complete class. And in a league that often rewards the loudest voices, the Sedins proved that respect can be earned and greatness achieved without ever raising yours. For all their brilliance in the regular season, the one thing missing from the Sedins' careers was a Stanley Cup. And in 2011, it felt like that was finally about to change. The Vancouver Canucks were the best team in hockey. They had won the President's Trophy, finished first in the league, and dominated their way through the playoffs. Daniel and Henrik were at the peak of their powers, leading the offense with vision, patience, and unmatched chemistry. They battled through tough matchups: Chicago, Nashville, San Jose, and then came the Stanley Cup Final, a 7-game war against the Boston Bruins. Vancouver won the first 2 games. The city was electric. The dream was within reach. But things quickly turned. The Bruins pushed back hard, physically and mentally. Boston's aggressive, heavy style took a toll on Vancouver. By Game 7, it all came down to one final night at Rogers Arena. The Canucks, one win away from their first championship in franchise history, and it slipped away. Boston won 4-0. The Sedins were heartbroken. After the loss, many players would have pointed fingers or blamed injuries, but not Daniel and Henrik. They stood in front of the cameras, answered every question, took full responsibility. They didn't complain, they didn't make excuses, they just said it wasn't enough, and they'd have to try again. Critics were harsh. Some said they weren't clutch. Others said they were too polite to win in a league built on grit. But those who knew hockey, truly knew it, saw what they had done, led their team, stayed composed, gave everything. The loss didn't stain their legacy. It revealed their character. But even with that heartbreak, their careers weren't without triumph. On the international stage, the Sedins found a different kind of glory. In 2006, playing for Team Sweden at the Winter Olympics in Turin, Daniel and Henrik helped lead their country to a gold medal. Sweden beat Finland 3-2 in the final, and the twins were instrumental throughout the tournament, playing key roles on a team filled with legends like Nicklas Lidström and Mats Sundin. It was a moment of validation. Olympic gold, the highest honor in international hockey, and the Sedins had earned it. Not with flash, but with consistency and smarts. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was everything they had worked for. Their NHL dream didn't end with the Stanley Cup, but that doesn't mean they fell short. They gave everything to their team, their city, and their country, And through every win and every loss, they never stopped doing what they always did best: showing up, playing hard, and letting their game speak for them. After 18 seasons with the Vancouver Canucks, nearly 2 decades of playing side by side, Daniel and Henrik Sedin made the decision to step away from the game. They announced their retirement near the end of the 2017 to 2018 season. There were no dramatic speeches, no long farewell tour, just a simple, heartfelt letter to the fans of Vancouver, thanking them for their support and explaining that the time had come. What followed was one of the most emotional weeks in franchise history. In their final home game at Rogers Arena, the Sedins gave the city one last memory they'll never forget. With the game tied in overtime, Vancouver got a power play. Henrik took the puck at the point, scanned the ice, and without hesitation fed a perfect pass to Daniel, who ripped a one-timer past the goalie for the game-winning goal. Just like it had always been, Henrik passing, Daniel scoring. Their final home game ended with one more perfect Sedin moment, and their very last NHL game, it came on the road against the Edmonton Oilers. The game didn't mean much in the standings, but it meant everything to the league. Fans gave them a standing ovation, players lined up to shake their hands. Even Connor McDavid, one of the league's brightest stars, admitted it was hard not to get emotional watching them walk off the ice. But even after they left the game, their presence never disappeared. In 2020, the Canucks honored the Twins in the most permanent way possible by retiring their jersey numbers. Henrik's number 33 and Daniel's number 22 are raised to the rafters at Rogers Arena, where they will hang forever. Few duos in NHL history have meant as much to one team, one city, and one fan base. And in 2022, their legacies reached the highest level. Both were inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame together. It was only fitting. They entered the league together. They left it together, and they took their place among the game's greatest side-by-side. What the Sedins proved quietly over time is that greatness isn't always loud. It doesn't have to come with trash talk or drama. Sometimes it comes with consistency, humility, and kindness. They changed the way people thought about hockey chemistry. They inspired a generation of players who understood that intelligence and unselfishness can be just as powerful as speed and strength. They didn't just play the game, they reshaped it. Not with noise, but with purpose. Not with ego, but with example. That is the true legacy of Daniel and Henrik Sedin. And if you thought the Sedins were quiet, wait until you hear about another NHL legend who barely said a word, but left an even bigger mark. He didn't talk trash. He didn't crave attention. In fact, some teammates said they barely heard him speak at all. But on the ice, he did things no one had ever seen before and helped turn the NHL into a global game in the process. Click the video on your screen to learn the incredible story of Börje Salming, the Swedish icon who shattered barriers, stood tall through brutal challenges, and proved that toughness isn't always about throwing punches. Thanks for watching, and don't forget, sometimes the quiet ones change everything.